I've never liked Thursdays. Something about them has always felt heavy and dull, like a gray cloud hanging between the middle of the week and the relief of Friday. They're not the exciting beginning of the week when energy is still fresh. And they're not the hopeful Friday when people already dream of rest. Thursdays are just there, dragging themselves along. For most of my life, when I was teaching, Thursdays meant only one thing: test day. For 32 long years, I collected notebooks, checked assignments, and graded tests every Thursday. It became a routine so deep in my bones that even now, 3 years after retiring, I still wake up with the strange, uneasy thought that some stack of papers is waiting for me. Sometimes, even in my dreams, half-solved physics problems chase me, equations scribbled on endless sheets of paper. My name is Edmund Hickman. I'm 65 years old now, though many mornings my reflection in the bathroom mirror makes me feel much older. For more than 3 decades, I stood in front of a chalkboard at Socorro High School, trying to make Newton's laws and Maxwell's equations seem alive to restless teenagers. I was a husband too once. A widower now. The mirror doesn't lie. It shows deep, tired lines etched around my eyes, grooves that only seem to grow deeper every year. My hair, once thick and dark, is now mostly gray, and even that gray is slowly thinning away. I lean closer to the mirror and remember how Linda used to tease me about those wrinkles. She'd smile, brush her hand across my face, and say they came from laughter, from all the jokes we'd shared, from all the years we spent finding happiness in small things. That was Linda. She could always find beauty in the marks that life left behind. Linda's been gone for 4 years now. Pancreatic cancer, the kind of disease that gives no mercy and leaves no time. I still remember sitting in the doctor's office, watching his lips move as he explained treatments and chances of survival. His words tried to sound hopeful, but his eyes, they told me the truth. There was no hope. 2 months later, she was gone. 2 months of unbearable pain for her, and then silence. An endless, crushing silence that filled every corner of the house we had lived in for 37 years. The electric razor hums in my hand, its sharp buzz breaking through the emptiness for a brief moment. But the noise fades, and the silence always comes back. After Linda's death, I walked away from the high school. What sense was there in teaching about the conservation of energy when all of mine had vanished with her? For a whole year, I didn't teach at all. But eventually, the quiet nights became too heavy to bear, so I started tutoring privately. Not for money, I had my pension and savings, but just to pass the hours, to keep my mind from wandering too far into the past. This morning, as I shave, I nick my chin. A tiny drop of blood appears, bright against my pale skin. The sting is nothing compared to the dull ache inside me that never seems to leave. The kitchen greets me with the same scene as always, a coffee cup from last night still in the sink, a plate with crumbs from old toast, the faint smell of yesterday's reheated dinner. Linda would never have allowed this. She was meticulous about keeping the house in order. I sigh, turn on the coffee maker, and reach for the nearest towel. It's the one embroidered with "To the Best Dad," a Father's Day gift Elaine gave me when she was still young enough to think of such things. That was about 15 years ago. Back then, she still made cards with glitter and glue, still believed. Her father was the smartest man in the world. Elaine is 37 now. My only child. Married to Noah, a man who works at some insurance company in what she describes as corporate sales. I'll be honest, I never understood exactly what it is he does, though Elaine once tried explaining. Not that we talk much these days. Most of our conversations are short, over the phone, and usually when she needs something. Coffee in hand, I stand by the window. Socorro has never been a bustling city. It's small, almost sleepy, but it's home. From our street, you can see the San Mateo Mountains stretching across the horizon. In spring, the mountains bloom in wild colors. and Linda always insisted we pack a basket and have picnics there. "Eddie," she'd laugh, "you can't live near such beauty and not enjoy it." The sharp ring of the telephone cuts through my thoughts. I glance at the caller ID. Elaine. Strange. It's 9:30 in the morning. She usually calls after dinner. My voice is raspy as I answer. "Hello?" "Hi, Dad." Her tone is bright, maybe a little too bright, and immediately I know she's calling for a reason. 37 years of being her father has taught me to hear the little differences in her voice. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I say. "You're early today?" "Oh, I'm calling before work. Listen, we're having a little family event. It's Noah's birthday this Saturday, his 35th. We're planning a dinner." I wait. I know what usually comes next. Every call like this tends to end with "Dad, we need help with the plumber," or "Dad, could you cover the car repairs?" And every time I've said yes, always yes. "And we wanted to invite you," she continues. "It'll be at the Moonlight restaurant, you know it? Noah's family will be there, a few friends too." Of course I know it. The Moonlight is the most expensive place in Sakaro, the kind of place Linda and I would never have chosen. We were more comfortable at Martha's Diner on Main Street, where the food was simple and honest. "I know it," I reply. "Sounds good." "Great. Saturday at 7. You know the address, right?" There's an edge of impatience in her tone, as if she wants to wrap this call up quickly. "Yes, I know," I say, and then before she can hang up, I ask, "How's Noah? How's work?" "I'm fine, Dad, but I've got to go. I'm late. I'll see you Saturday." And the line clicks dead. No, "How are you, Dad?" No real conversation, just as it always has been. I stare at my half-empty cup of coffee, sighing. Odd. She hadn't asked for money. That was unusual. Could it mean something had changed? I didn't dare let myself hope, but a tiny flicker of hope lit up inside me anyway. After finishing my coffee, I wandered into the garage. The place was cluttered, as it always was, boxes stacked along the walls, old tools hanging crookedly, a few cans of paint that had dried up years ago. In the far corner, under a thin layer of dust, stood my telescope. It had been a gift from my colleagues at school on my 60th birthday. I hadn't used it much, not really. Linda had died only a few months later, and after that, looking at the stars felt meaningless. But today, for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt the urge to pull it out, to check if it still worked. I carefully brushed off the dust, ran a rag across the lenses, and adjusted the tripod. The telescope itself was in good condition, though, stiff from neglect. As I flipped through the old manual, a small piece of paper slipped out. It was a photograph I had once used as a bookmark. I picked it up, and there she was. Elaine, no more than 10 years old, standing proudly at her school's science fair next to a cardboard volcano. She was grinning ear to ear, her face flushed with excitement. I could almost hear her voice, again excitedly explaining how the vinegar and baking soda created lava. We had spent nights working on that volcano together, mixing and testing until she was satisfied. Back then, she dreamed of space, of galaxies, of being an explorer, of the universe. She wanted to be a scientist. When, I wondered, did that girl disappear? When did her bright curiosity get replaced by this hunger for money, for things, for status symbols like cars and fancy restaurants? I slipped the photo back into the manual and set the telescope aside. The afternoon crept in slowly. I had two tutoring sessions scheduled with the Perry twins, a pair of bright kids struggling through their final exams. They weren't bad students, just easily distracted like most teenagers. For 2 hours, I guided them through physics problems, trying to spark even a small light of interest in the subject. They thanked me politely before leaving, and I was left once again in my quiet house. Later, I stopped by the grocery store. As I was picking out bread, I heard a familiar voice. "Edmund? I haven't seen you in ages." I turned and saw Beverly, Thornton, my neighbor from a few doors down. She was holding a basket full of vegetables, her gray hair pinned neatly back. Beverly, I said with a small smile. It's been a while. How are you doing? She asked kindly. Beverly was a widow, too. Her husband had passed away just a year before Linda. I'm hanging in there, I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. How about you? Oh, I joined a gardening club, she said, her eyes lighting up. You know, it turns out you can still learn how to grow orchids at our age. She laughed softly, clearly proud of her new hobby. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Beverly had always been good at moving forward, at finding new things to occupy her time. I, on the other hand, still felt anchored to the past, stuck, in routines that never changed. You could join a club too, Edmund, she suggested, reading my silence. There's an astronomy group at the community center. You'd enjoy it. You're a physics teacher. I was a teacher, I corrected her automatically. Maybe I'll stop by sometime. We exchanged goodbyes, and I carried my groceries home. Her words stayed with me, though. Maybe she was right. Maybe I needed something besides tutoring and long nights of old movies. But the thought alone exhausted me. Without Linda, I found it hard to begin anything new. She was always the one to push us into adventures, to pull me out of my comfort zone. Without her, the days felt repetitive, one blending into the next. That evening, I cooked a simple meal, scrambled eggs and toast, and sat at the table thinking about Elaine's invitation. Something about it unsettled me. It wasn't like her to include me in family gatherings, especially ones with Noah's parents. Hiram and Doris Berkeley had always been cold toward me. They carried themselves like royalty, looking down their noses at me as if being a teacher wasn't a respectable career. In their world, the only thing that mattered was titles, money, and climbing higher. I never cared for their company. After dinner, I turned on the television. My fingers flipped through the channels without interest until I landed on a documentary about the deep sea. Strange creatures drifted across the screen, glowing in the dark waters. I tried to focus on it, but halfway through, the phone rang again. It was Elaine. Dad, I forgot to ask, she said quickly, not even bothering with a greeting. You're coming in the car, right? Yes, I replied slowly. Why? Oh, nothing. Just checking. Also, Moonlight is a pretty formal place, you know. You'll need to dress appropriately. I have a suit, Elaine, I said, irritation slipping into my voice. The same one I wore for 32 years while teaching, the same one I buried your mother in. There was a pause on the line. Her voice softened. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted to make sure everything would be okay. Everything will be fine, I replied, my annoyance giving way to tiredness. Anything else? No, that's it. I'll see you Saturday. And just like that, the call ended. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, wondering, why had she been so specific about the car and the clothes? Something about it didn't sit right with me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. I went back to the documentary, but my mind wandered elsewhere. I thought about money. How 3 months ago Elaine and Noah had begged me for $12,000 for a new SUV. I had pulled it from my retirement savings, even taking the penalty for withdrawing early. She promised to pay it back, but, like the kitchen, renovation loan last year and the wedding expenses 10 years ago. The money was gone for good. At the time, I told myself I was helping my daughter, giving her the life she deserved. But now I realized I was just letting her lean on me like an endless bank machine. And yet, how could I refuse her? She's my only child, the last piece of family I have left since Linda. The movie ended, credits rolling across the screen, but I didn't notice. I sat there, lost in thought until finally I turned off the television and made my way to the bedroom. On the bedside table, next to the lamp, was a framed photograph. Linda, smiling, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. I had taken that picture a year before her illness, on one of our trips to the mountains. I could still hear her voice. "Eddie, when I'm gone, remember that life goes on. Don't let sadness overshadow everything else." But I hadn't kept that promise. I let grief consume me. I buried myself in work and then in endless routine, closing myself off from the world. Maybe it was time to change that. Maybe even at 65 I could still find a way to live again. With that thought, I lay down. But the night stretched long, and sleep did not come easily. Elaine's face was in front of me. Not the grown woman using her father, but the little girl who had once looked at me with adoration and trust. Somewhere along the way, we had lost that connection, and I wasn't sure if it could be restored. The next day, I woke up late. The sun was already high in the sky, illuminating the room through the loosely drawn curtains. Friday, a day with no classes with students. Getting out of bed, I mechanically performed the morning ritual, washed my face, shaved, made coffee. Then I decided to do something unusual. Instead of sitting at home, I went to the city library. Sakuro's library was small but cozy. I picked out a few books on astronomy, remembering Beverly's words about the stargazing club. Maybe I should really go there? I didn't have to join right away. I could just see how their meetings went. Back home, I spent the rest of the day reading. Books about space reminded me of why I once chose physics. It wasn't just the science of formulas and laws, but about understanding the universe, its mysteries and beauty. At some point, I caught myself thinking that for the first time in a long time, I felt a slight excitement, an interest in something new. In the evening, Elaine called again. "Dad, just reminding you about dinner tomorrow night." Her voice sounded strangely tense. 7 p.m., moonlight. "I remember, Elaine," I replied. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, sure," she answered a little too quickly. "Just checking in. Noah's really glad you're coming." It was a blatant lie. Noah had never been excited about my presence. From the beginning of their relationship, he treated me with barely concealed disdain. Perhaps because I didn't fit his idea of the right test. I wasn't rich or powerful, couldn't open the doors to high society for them. "I'm glad to see Noah, too," I lied back. "I'll see you tomorrow." After the call, the anxiety returned. Why was Elaine so insistent on my presence? Why had she been so specific about the car and the clothes? Something told me that tomorrow night would be more than just a family dinner. I picked up one of the astronomy books and walked out onto the back porch. The night was clear and the stars shone brightly over Sakuro. Somewhere out there among those distant lights was a universe full of wonder and mystery. He sat looking up and thought about Linda's words. Life goes on. Maybe it was just beginning for me. With that strange but hopeful thought, I went back into the house and went to bed. Tomorrow was an important day, and something told me that it could change a lot of things in my life. Saturday came unexpectedly quickly. I woke up earlier than usual with a heavy feeling in my chest, as if it were not a family celebration, but a test. The clock read 6 hours in the morning, 13 hours until dinner, but I was already feeling anxious. I made coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the San Mateo Mountains, colored pink by the morning sun. The day promised to be clear. Linda loved days like this. We often went on picnics, took little Elaine with us, spread out a blanket, and spent hours talking and watching the clouds. It's strange how one's relationship with one's own child changes. When Elaine was little, she looked at me with admiration, as if I knew the answers to everything in the world. I remember explaining to her why the sky was blue, how rainbows worked, why the wind blew. She listened with her mouth open, and it seemed to me that nothing was more important than those moments. And now I'm just an old man with a pension and savings, someone to call when the car breaks down or the roof leaks, but not someone you call to share your joy or just to talk. When exactly did things change? It probably started when Elaine went to college in Albuquerque. I remember the day Linda and I drove her to campus. A car full of boxes of stuff, a dorm room she was to share with a strange girl. Elaine was so excited, so full of hope. Linda and I were happy for her too, even though we knew we would miss her. College was expensive. Linda and I had been saving for years for our daughter's education, but we still had to take out a loan. I never mentioned this to Elaine. I didn't want her to feel like a burden. We wanted her to have all the opportunities we didn't have. For the first year, she called often, talking about her studies, about her new friends. She would visit on weekends, bringing stacks of textbooks and dirty laundry. Linda and I were happy every time she came, every time she called. Then the calls got less frequent. The visits got shorter. There were new friends, new interests. It's normal, Linda said, part of growing up. But I felt I was losing touch with my daughter, and it bothered me. In her third year, Elaine met Noah. He was 2 years older, studying business administration, and came from a family much more affluent than ours. I remember the first time Elaine brought him to our house for dinner. He was polite, but there was something insincere about his politeness, as if he was condescending to socialize with us. After dinner, when Elaine went out to help Linda with dessert, Noah asked me how much I made as a teacher. The question caught me off guard, and I remember mumbling something about how working in education wasn't about money, but about impacting future generations. He nodded as if I had confirmed his worst suspicions. Linda immediately disliked Noah, though she tried to hide it for Elaine's sake. "There's no heart in him, Eddie," she told me after they left. "He looks at people as things, useful or useless." I wanted to believe she was wrong, that it was just prejudice. After all, Elaine had chosen him, and I trusted her judgment. But the years have shown that Linda was right. When Elaine announced her engagement during her senior year of college, Linda and I pretended to be overjoyed. We wanted our daughter to be happy, and if Noah was her choice, we had to honor that. The wedding was lavish and expensive. Noah's parents insisted on it, even though technically the cost was to be borne by us aspirants of the bride. I remember a conversation with Hiram Berkeley, Noah's father, when he offered to help with the expenses if we couldn't pull it off. There was so much condescension in his voice that I instantly decided we could manage on our own. Linda and I took out a loan against the house. We spent almost all of our savings, but the wedding was exactly what Elaine wanted. With 300 guests, 5-star catering, and a honeymoon in Hawaii. After the wedding, Elaine and Noah moved to Sakaro. Noah was transferred to the local branch of his company. I was excited to have my daughter around, hoping we would grow closer again. But that didn't happen. They bought a house in a new neighborhood on the opposite side of town. We saw each other rarely, mostly on holidays, and each meeting seemed more and more strained. Then, Linda got sick. 4 years ago, out of the blue, Elaine came to the hospital, but rarely and not for long. Always in a hurry, always busy with work. Home. Her life. When Linda died, Elaine organized the funeral efficiently, like a business meeting. She was there for me that day, but I felt that emotionally she was somewhere far away. After the funeral, our relationship became even more distant. Elaine called once a week, then once a month, and then only when she needed something. Car broke down, needed money for repairs, decided to renovate the kitchen. Could I help pay for it? They want a new SUV. Can I give them money for a down payment? And I always said yes, because Elaine was all I had left. Because I couldn't say no to my daughter, even if I knew she was using me. Because I was too afraid of being all alone. Looking at my watch, I found myself sitting by the window for over an hour, engrossed in my memories. It was going to be a long day, and I needed something to do. I decided to tidy up my suit for the evening out. My only suit was hanging in my closet, neatly packed in a garment bag. The last time I'd worn it was for Linda's funeral. Before that, Elaine's graduation. The dark blue fabric had faded a little at the shoulders, but overall the suit looked presentable. The shirt needed ironing and the tie. I suddenly realized that I didn't remember how to tie a tie. For the last 3 years of high school, I had only worn sweaters or shirts with the collar unbuttoned. I had to look up the instructions on the internet. 40 minutes and 5 attempts later, the tie was tied. Not perfectly, but acceptable. I looked at myself in the mirror. A 65-year-old man with thinning gray hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes. It can't get any better than this, I thought, and took off my suit so it wouldn't wrinkle before the evening. I spent the rest of the day leafing through the astronomy books I borrowed from the library. The pictures of distant galaxies, nebulae, and star clusters were mesmerizing. I remembered my childhood dream of becoming an astronomer, but in the small town where I grew up, it seemed like a pipe dream. High school physics was the closest available approximation to the stars. At 5 o'clock, I started getting ready. I showered, shaved thoroughly, put my suit back on. All movements were mechanical, as if I was preparing not for a family dinner, but for a funeral. Maybe in a way, I was a funeral for my illusions that my relationship with my daughter could be restored. At 6:30, I got in the car. My old Ford looked out of place next to modern SUVs and sports cars, but it had served me faithfully for the past 15 years. I turned on the radio for the local news and weather report. The familiar voice of the announcer recounting the minor happenings of Socorro was oddly soothing. The journey to the restaurant took about 20 minutes. Moonlight was located in a new neighborhood of the city among glass office buildings and trendy boutiques. The modern 2-story building with panoramic windows and neon signage was a stark contrast to the traditional architecture of old Socorro. A young man in uniform stood at the entrance offering valet parking. I reluctantly handed him the keys to my shabby Ford and entered the restaurant. Inside, moonlight lived up to its pretentious facade. Dim lighting, snow-white tablecloths on the tables, soft classical music, waiters, and strict suits. At the reception desk stood a young woman with a clipboard. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked with a professional smile. "Yes, under the name Berkeley or Hickman?" "I'm not sure," I replied, suddenly realizing I didn't know whose name Elaine had a reservation under. The woman looked at the list on the clipboard. "Berkeley table for 8. Your company has already arrived. Let me show you out." I followed her across the room, feeling out of place in my old suit among the elegant crowd. Shelled me to a large round table in the far corner of the hall where several people were already seated. Elaine noticed me first. She was in a dark red dress with neat hair and makeup that made her look older than her 37 years. Sitting next to her was Noah in a gray suit that I was sure cost more than my monthly pension. "Daddy." Elaine stood up and walked over to me. "You made it." She hugged me and I could smell the expensive perfume. The hug was brief and mechanical, as if she were performing a mandatory ritual. "Of course you came," I replied. "I promised." "Meet everyone." Elaine turned back to the table. "You know Noah's parents, Hiram and Doris." The older couple nodded to me without much enthusiasm. Hiram was tall with gray hair and cold blue eyes. Doris, a thin woman with perfect styling and a strange smile, nodded faintly. "And this is Noah's sister, Agatha, and her husband, Wesley," Elaine continued, pointing to the young couple across the hall. Agatha was a younger copy of her mother. The same cold eyes, the same strained smile. Wesley, a large man with a budding bald spot, nodded at me with the look of someone who didn't care who I was. "And of course, the birthday boy," Elaine pointed to Noah, who raised his wine glass in my direction. "Happy birthday, Noah," I said, sitting down in the only empty seat between Agatha and the empty chair. "Thank you, Edmund," Noah replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The waiter immediately came to the table, offering a menu. I took the leather folder and almost choked when I saw the prices. The cheapest dish cost as much as I spent on groceries for a week. "Order whatever you want," Noah announced, addressing everyone but me. Today was a special day. I chose the pasta with mushrooms, one of the most inexpensive dishes on the menu, though it seemed like an unacceptable luxury. The others ordered steaks, lobster, and a bottle of wine that I was sure cost more than my monthly pension. The conversation at the table was about things I didn't understand much about. Hiram talked about the stock market. Wesley bragged about his new yacht. Agatha talked about her recent trip to Paris. I sat in silence, feeling like an outsider at this celebration of life. "And how are you, Edmund?" Doris suddenly turned to me as if she'd remembered the rules of decorum. "Did Elaine tell me you were retired?" "Yes, for 3 years now," I replied, "but I'm still giving private physics lessons." "That's nice." Her tone made it clear that she didn't think it was a worthy occupation. "What else do you do?" I wanted to answer that. I was trying to get over the loss of my wife and the estrangement of my daughter, but instead I said, reading, watching documentaries. "I've recently gotten interested in astronomy." "Dad always loved science," Elaine put in, as if trying to justify me to these people. "He was a great teacher, and many of his students went on to prestigious universities." I looked at my daughter in surprise. She had never praised my profession before. She usually treated it with a slight disdain, as if being a teacher was something shameful. "Education is a noble profession," Hiram said, as if he were talking about cleaning sewers. "Though, of course, not the most lucrative. Not everything is measured." "In money," I said, trying not to show my irritation. Sure, Hiram smiled indulgently. "Although, it's nice to have a financial cushion in your old age, too." I felt Elaine tense up beside me. She cast a quick glance at Noah, who nodded faintly. "Dad's doing okay financially," she said a little too quickly. "Really, Dad?" I didn't bother to clarify that doing okay meant a modest teacher's pension and a small savings that kept melting away thanks to Elaine and Noah's emergencies. "I'm not complaining," he replied briefly. The waiter brought appetizers, and the conversation, to my relief, turned to other topics. Agatha was talking about the plans for remodeling their country house. Doris was discussing some charity balls she and Hiram were going to next month. I ate in silence, nodding occasionally when someone addressed. Directly. Elaine seemed tense, glancing at me often as if expecting something. Noah, sitting across from me, was the center of attention, talking about some big contract his company had recently signed. After the appetizers, the main courses arrived. My pasta, with mushrooms, looked modest compared to the huge steaks and lobsters of the others. Hiram ordered another bottle of wine, more expensive than the previous one. "To Noah," he proclaimed, raising his glass, "to my son, who has accomplished more in his 35 years than many have in a lifetime." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine, too, though I drank only water. I'd never liked alcohol, and I'd stopped drinking it after Linda's death. "And to our growing family," Doris added, looking meaningfully at Elaine and Noah. Elaine blushed, slightly, and Noah put his arm around her shoulders. I looked at my daughter questioningly.